day, viewers. Once again, you're welcome to the class on English grammar. And then today we'll be looking at the topic sentence or clausal elements. Now, that means that this topic could actually be regarded as sentence elements or clausal elements. Sentence elements or clausal elements. So whichever one you want to call it. Now, why I try as much as possible to do all of these is because, the number of scholars on these particular concepts of grammar, and then different people would actually call it different names they prefer. So, whether it's sentence elements you want to call it, or you want to regard it as clausal elements, whichever one you find, you're okay. The most important thing is that they are elements that define a sentence, or better still, elements that make up a sentence. So, and according to what you could see on the screen, you could see the subject. So every sentence should have a subject. Every sentence should have a predicator or verb. It's known as verb, but some other people prefer to call it the predicator. Whichever way you want to call it, it's no problem. Then we have the object or the complement extensive. So another name for object is complement extensive. Now, actually, some of these terminologies are based on whether we're looking at it from the traditional grammar perspective and traditional grammarian perspective, or we're looking at it from the modern grammarian perspective. But whichever one, I'm not here to actually be going into some of the theories of grammar. So all I'll just do is tell you that if you call it object, you're right. If you call it complement extensive, you're right. So whichever your lecturer, whichever your tutor goes with, you could actually go with any of them. But for the sake of this class, we could call it object, or we could also refer to it as a complement extensive. Do you understand that? Thank you. Then we also have what we call the complement intensive. Yeah, the complement intensive. And then we have what we could call the adjunct or adverbial. Now, the same thing goes with this. You could call it the adjunct, you could call it the adverbial, whichever one. But then I would prefer to actually refer to it as adverbial. So that's just it. So let's go fully and properly into today's class. Now, we're looking at all of these clausal elements from the beginning till the end, and then let's start with the subject. Yes, the subject. No, subject. Now, what is the subject? One of the things you should note first of all is that the subject is usually the performer of an action in a sentence. That is, the subject is usually the performer of an action in a sentence. When you have a sentence, most often a sentence would have told us that something was done. Most often, I'm not saying all the time, but most often a sentence would have told us that something was done. Now, that person or the agent that actually performed that action that was done is known as the subject. Do you get it? So it is, a subject is usually the performer of an action. It is also known as the agent or doer of an action. So you have performer, you have agent, you have doer. All of those you could refer to as the subject of a sentence. So the subject could be the performer of an action, the agent or the doer of the action that is denoted by the verb. Do you understand it? So whatever action the verb denotes, whoever performs that action is known as the subject. Do you understand that? Now, however, this description is limited to some levels. Yes, but I would try to make these as basic as possible so that we don't get to other complex terminologies around this whole thing. So for now, let's just take it that the subject is the performer, the agent of the doer of an action in a sentence. Do you get it? The performer, the agent, the doer of an action in a sentence. That's the subject. Meanwhile, you should note that the subject also usually and structurally maintains the initial position in a sentence. So the subject usually maintains the initial position in a sentence. That is to say, when you see every sentence, most often the subject rather is usually at the initial position of the sentence. So let's look at this. For instance, we have I'm coming. We have the sentence, she danced joyfully. Joyfully. She danced joyfully. Now, if you look at this very well, what is the subject? She, right? Exactly. So, at the initial position. So, you have the subject at the initial position of that sentence. Let's look at another one. This place, sorry. This place stinks terribly. So this place is your subject. This place is your subject. So you see that? So at the initial position of every sentence, you also have the examination. The examination seemed very difficult. Seemed very difficult. The examination seemed very difficult. Sorry, there is an L here and there is a U here. So the examination seemed very difficult. So what is the subject here? The examination. The examination. We also have Janet. Janet looks beautiful. Janet looks beautiful. Now, what is the subject? Janet. Then we also have I stole the money. Now I don't steal on a normal day, but then for the sake of this sentence, I stole the money. So what is the subject here? I is the subject. So don't forget, the subject usually maintains the initial position of the sentence. The subject is the performer of an action. So if you look at the first sentence, she danced joyfully. Who danced joyfully? She. This place stinks terribly. What place or what stinks terribly? This place. The examination seemed very difficult. What seemed very difficult? The examination. Janet looks beautiful. Who looks beautiful? Janet. I stole the money. Who stole the money? I. So that's all that you need to know about the subject. Now, let's go to the characteristics of the subject. Characteristic of the subject. So you have characteristics of the subject. So sticks. Now, one of the first characteristics of the subject is that it is the second most central or obligatory element in the English clause. The second most central. The second most central or obligatory element or obligatory element. Now, what we mean by this is the element in a sentence. Now, what we mean by this is that all of the clausal elements, those 5 clausal elements, the subject, the predicator, the object, the complement intensive, and the adjunct or adverbial. Now, all of them, they have their level of being obligatory or central in a sentence. Now, what I mean by that is that they have the level of what we can, of to what extent can we not do without them in a sentence. So, the subject is one of those elements that in most sentences cannot be done without. Do you get it? So the subject is the second most central or obligatory element in the English sentence or English clause. That means that every other element you may do without them, but for the subject, it's almost always present in a sentence. Do you get it? However, the exceptions. But just like I said, I'm trying to teach this topic as basic as possible, so I wouldn't go into some of the exception for the sake of this particular topic. We would actually create another advanced level of this particular topic where you can actually get to see some other exceptions of these. Or do you get it? But in most sentences, the subject is usually present, and then it is the second most central or second most obligatory element in the English sentence or English clause. Do you get it? Now, it occurs in all types of verbs. It occurs in all types of verbs. So, occurs in all types of verbs. Now, if you actually do not know much about what we mean by types of verbs here, then you might actually have a problem with this. Now, what I mean by this is that we have different categories of verbs. We have verbs that we could call stative verbs, we have verbs we could call dynamic verbs, we have verbs we could call linking verbs, we have verbs we could call action verbs, and a number of those. If you need to know more about that, go and watch our video on parts of speeches. Do you get it? Yeah, go and watch our videos on the parts of speeches. Now, or specifically on the verbal goal. Now, when we say it occurs in all types of verbs, like regardless of whatever verb that you find in a sentence, the subject should still be present. Yes, there are some other clausal elements that when you have a particular type of verb, you can never see. For instance, let me just give you a bit of this. Now, on a normal day, when we have an action verb, because there is an action verb, then there must actually have been someone who received the action. Do you get it? Someone or something that received the action. So most likely after an action verb, then we should obviously have an object, or we should to a great extent have an object. However, when we have a linking verb, we should not have an object, because after a linking verb, then that means that the subject is actually being linked with another item, which is most likely going to be the complement intensive. Do you understand that? So that means that the type of verb we have, if it is action, can determine whether we would have an object, and if it is linking, will determine whether we would have a complement intensive. But for the subject, none of those differences matter. Whether it is an action verb or a linking verb, the subject is always present. Whether it is a stative or a dynamic verb, the subject is always present. Whether the sentence is in present tense or its past tense, the subject is to be present. Do you get it? So it usually occurs in all types of verbs. That's just it. So the next thing is, it determines the concord of the verbal phrase. Yes, determines the concord of the verbal phrase. Now, what do you mean by this? The subject, if simple, would lead to, if singular, if the subject is singular, that means that the verbal phrase, also known as a predicator, would be singular. And if the subject is plural, the verbal phrase would also be plural. It's as simple as that. So a singular subject would take what? A singular verb, while a plural subject would take a plural verb. So that's as simple as the subject. So the subject determines the concord of the verbal phrase, and automatically that means it determines the concord of the whole clause or the whole sentence. So it's as simple as that. The next thing is, it is characteristically realized by nouns. Characteristically realized by nouns, pronouns, noun phrases, noun clauses, and gerunds. Noun clauses, gerunds, and to infinitives. To infinitives. So, sorry, let me just put this. Now, so it is characteristically realized by nouns, pronouns, noun phrases, noun clauses, gerunds, and to infinitives. So these are the items that usually realize the subject. For instance, all of the sentences I gave you on the example I gave you, we have she. That is what? A pronoun, a personal pronoun. This place, a noun phrase. The examination, another noun phrase. Janet, just a singular proper noun. I, another personal pronoun. Do you get it? So we say that the subject is usually characteristically realized by nouns, pronouns, noun phrases, noun clauses, gerunds, and to infinitives. So any of these items can realize a subject. For instance, look at an example of a gerund. When I say something like sleeping is my hobby. Do you get it? So sleeping is my hobby. So in this case, it's a gerund that is actually realizing the subject. In this case, do you get it? So it's a gerund that is realizing the subject. So a subject rather can be realized by any of these items, whether it's a noun, a pronoun, a noun phrase, a noun clause, a gerund, or a to infinitive. So The next characteristic of the subject is that it usually maintains the initial position in most clauses. It usually maintains the initial position in most clauses. So now, don't forget I said usually. That means that there might be exceptions once in a while. But like I said earlier, I'm not trying to go by exception. I'm not trying to define exceptions for these particular classes. So the subject usually maintains the initial position. Like all of the examples you've seen me give so far, we have she here, we have this place here, we have the examination here, we have Janet here, we have I here, and even here we have sleeping. Do you get it? So the subject usually maintains the initial position of the sentence. Another thing you should note about the subject is that however, once in a while, it is now. Oh, sorry. Before I actually go to the exception that I actually want to do, now it is in the nominative case as it is the agent of the sentence. Now there's something we call nominative case and accusative case, but right now we're dealing with the nominative case. Now it is usually in the nominative case because anything that is actually the agent of a sentence, anything that's actually the performer of a sentence, or anything that's actually the performer of the action in a sentence is usually in the nominative case. You get it? So the subject is usually or is in the nominative case as it is the agent of the sentence. Now, also in a sentence that is an SPC sentence, the subject usually maintains an intensive role with the complement. Now, when we say complement here, we mean complement intensive. So it usually maintains an intensive role with a complement if the sentence is an SPC sentence. You remember what I if you've watched a video on basic simple sentences, you would realize that we actually talked about the SPC, whereby we said that the S is equals to the C and the C is equals to the S. So in this kind of case, the subject is actually maintaining an intensive role with the complement intensive, which means that the subject can be substituted for the complement intensive, and especially when the complement intensive is a nominal phrase. But in case it is not, of course, the summary is still that the subject actually maintains an intensive role with the complement, which means that the subject, or better still, the complement refers back to the subject. So that's just that on that. So yeah, so let's go on. We also have that, just as has been said in the definition, it is usually the performer of the action. Of course, it is usually the performer of the action. So you should know that. Do I even have to put that? Yeah, just put that. Usually the performer of the action. Now, don't forget that I said usually, which means that once in a while there may be an exception to this particular rule of it. Then the subject is, of course, like we said, is actually an obligatory element, or better still, one of the most obligatory elements. However, it is not in all cases. So do you get it? So it is, and so we've already talked about the fact that it is usually an obligatory element. So let's just stop it here. There are a number of other characteristics of the subject, but for the sake of this class, let's just put an end to it here. So